in this essay, he thinks that he can identify an archetypal pattern that is beneath the surface of the phenomena of what's going on in this crazy place, Germany of the 1930s. And basically, he takes the view that this is a society or a collective that is possessed. They've lost their consciousness and they've entered into a regression. And he uses the word Ergriffenheit, which means possession, and Ergreifer, which is the possessor. He says if somebody is ergriffen, if they're possessed, they're possessed by something, by a possessor. So there is this concept of a collective, a mass movement being possessed by an archetypal energy, an archetypal pattern, force, power. And the leader, the so-called leader of that, and he uses the word leader with a tongue in cheek, is possessed by the same power, by the same force, and is like the spokesman for that force. And he says that force is the ancient Germanic god Wotan. And he makes quite an extensive argument for why it's Wotan and not Dionysus, and why it's not some other god. He says Wotan is embedded in the national psyche. In nations that have a coherence, and we have to think about a nation like Germany, where everybody is German. Okay, this is not an international society at that time. Everybody's German, like in Japan. Everybody's Japanese. Less than 1% of the people who live in Japan, even today, aren't Japanese, are not. America is such a different place. Switzerland's a very different place. 30% of the people who live in Switzerland are not Swiss. But when you get countries where you've got this homogeneous population, they all belong to that tribe. And that tribe has a root in history, a pre-Christian root. And those pre-Christian roots have disappeared in the meantime because Christianity took over. The new God that took over, Christ and Christendom, is an international God. It's not a local God. It's not a national God. Christ is for the world. Christ is, from the New Testament times onward, was not a national God. Didn't belong to anybody, any particular people. That was Paul's message to the Gentiles. Christ is for everybody. Christ is an international God, a global God. Wotan is a very specific tribal national god that belongs to this people, the Germans, okay, die Deutschen, Deutsche Nation, and has its roots and has been passed on subterraneanly under the surface of this Christian facade, so to speak. And now that Christendom has weakened at the end of its second millennium, has weakened to the extent it's lost its grip on the collective, so that it cannot tell the Germans what to do anymore. It can't say it's wrong to go to war against the French. The French are also Christians. It's wrong to go into Poland. Poland's are also Catholics. You can't fight against your brothers. Christendom is helpless. The Pope's words mean nothing. The Christian churches can do nothing. This is a movement of the nation from the bottom, and what has happened, he says, is that the libido has regressed for various reasons. Call it maybe the First World War, the economic crisis, all kinds of collective reasons. The libido has regressed to an old riverbed. And he says these archetypal patterns are like old riverbeds. For a long time, no water runs in them, but the bed is still there. And then when something dams up the water in another place, the water finds the old riverbed and comes rushing down, and comes down with such a force. If you've ever seen the floodwaters coming down in a dry country like Arizona or someplace, they sweep away everything in front of them. They rush with a madness and a wildness. And those are the images that Jung uses to describe this Wotanic energy, Wotan's energy in Germany. He says here in Switzerland, we look at it with a kind of smile on our faces. We hear a little bit and we look the other way. We don't want to be bothered by it, but we see it in the south, in Italy. We see something going on there. We see it in the north in Germany. And we're frightened of it, but we don't want to admit it. But up there, it's wild. It's like a wild stream finding an old riverbed, sweeping everything in front of it. And this is the state of possession. And their so-called leader, Der Führer, is as helpless as anybody else to control this. He just speaks for it. He gets in front of it. It's going to destroy him. It's going to destroy them. This is a madness. This is a wild, manic, crazed situation. These people are in a state of possession. That's what he says in the Wotan paper. So there's this idea that collectively the masses can regress to an old pattern, an old regressive, very primitive, very emotional. He says Wotan is emotion and intuition. It has nothing to do with thinking. There's no reflection there. There's no thinking function. It's the old brain run amok. And it's totally unconnected to higher. Where are the German philosophers? Where is their culture? It's swept away. Nobody is standing in the way of this thing, and he stands in awe of it. It's an incredible sight to behold. Where does the prescription come from? Where is the king? Where is somebody who stands up and says, "Look, folks." And I think people try to do this. The UN tries to do it. Dalai Lama tries to do it. Maybe a collection of leaders will say, we really need to change our thinking so fundamentally. We don't know exactly what the new patterns will be, but it can't, this isn't sustainable. Al Gore is trying to do things like that. I mean, there are people popping up. And somewhere, somebody's got to say, well, where do we go? That's what a leader does, isn't it? A leader says, well, let's not go in this direction. Let's go in this direction now, and can convince you that that is not only a good idea, but it's the only idea that will ensure survival. I don't know. I look for leadership somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think Obama, a figure like Obama, certainly promised that at the beginning, and when he came to Berlin and spoke in Berlin, and there were, 500,000 people in the streets or something, it was very impressive. And I think he galvanized a kind of global idea of leadership, but then he gets, of course, caught and bogged down in local politics in the United States. So he can't be a world leader. He won't get reelected.